And welcome to the Global View on this Tuesday. I'm Andrew Gagan. Great to have you with us here at AusBiz. And well, let's first start in the States. That's where the action is. US markets closed for Martin Luther King Day, but the global focus was on Washington and the inauguration of Donald Trump.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
Sworn in as the 47th President of the United States, Donald Trump set to work immediately, beginning his second term in office.
The golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation, and we will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer. During every single day of the Trump administration, I will very simply put America first.
Well, as I mentioned, US markets were closed, but European equity markets were firmly in positive territory after indications that he would not impose import tariffs immediately. Well, among the executive orders the President is issuing, he said he would establish an external revenue service imposing tariffs and taxing countries to enrich Americans while promising to overhaul the trade system. However, he stopped short of imposing new tariffs on his first day, instead directing federal agencies to evaluate US trade relationships with China, Canada and Mexico.
Instead of taxing our citizens to enrich other countries, we will tariff and tax foreign countries to enrich our citizens.
He said he would declare an illegal immigration national emergency, send troops to the US-Mexico border and reinstate his Remain in Mexico policy and revoke the birthright citizenship for US-born children whose parents lack legal immigration status. And he would immediately declare a national energy emergency, promising to fill up strategic oil reserves and export US energy all over the world.
We will drill, baby, drill.
And the US is again withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement, while he'll also revoke what he called the electric vehicle mandate. Well, while the bond market was closed for the holiday, bond yields in the futures market fell following the inauguration. And the US dollar fell after President Trump did not include trade tariffs in his initial executive orders. The Aussie dollar, which can serve as a more liquid proxy for the Chinese currency, rose more than 1% on the day, currently at 62.7 US cents. And Bitcoin faded from its recent highs after Trump did not mention crypto during his speech. However, his own newly minted cryptocurrency soared to top around $10 billion in market value ahead of his return to the White House. The meme coin surged more than 73% amid serious ethical and regulatory questions. Well, commodities were mixed. Oil prices settled lower after President Trump promised to fill up strategic reserves and export American energy. Brent crude futures closing down almost 1% at $80 a barrel. Copper fell more than 1%. Iron ore little changed at $104 a tonne. And gold rose around 0.25% to $2,708, boosted by a weaker US dollar. So let's get some reaction. Steve Sosnick joining us from Interactive Brokers. Steve, great to catch up with you. A belated Happy New Year. We haven't spoken to each other since prior to Christmas. And of course, all about Donald Trump today. Interesting, the market reaction, certainly on this side. Obviously, US markets closed there, but some relief perhaps that those promised tariffs haven't yet eventuated. What have you heard so far from him?
Well, Andrew, really not much more than you just reported. He's literally just beginning an event at an indoor basketball arena. It was supposed to begin at 3:30. He got around to it at about 5:15. This is something we're going to have to get used to. He's very frequently late for things, and so supposedly there's a table set up. I didn't really get a chance to see it. I overheard it on a radio program that there's a table set up with pens and he's going to sign executive orders. As of now, he really hasn't done anything in that sense yet. He's spoken about stuff. The only thing really we've learned is Vivek Ramaswamy will not be part of the so-called DOGE, the government Department of Government Efficiency. But we'll really have to see what's happening now. The reporting that's come out has been that any tariffs today, any tariff talk will be relatively modest. But he definitely laid out his priorities in the speech. He didn't really talk about taxes. Crypto came off its highs because he didn't really talk about that. I think the crypto faithful were hoping for that. The tone was definitely, not. It was more about catering to his supporters and himself rather than the country as a whole. So we'll have to see how that all plays out. But for now, I think the markets started to breathe a bit of a sigh of relief late last week. That tariffs might be a bit calmer, and certainly that seemed to be the case in what limited trading we saw today and what's going on overnight, our time overnight.
Yeah, as I mentioned, the US dollar coming off perhaps because of that lack of detail or any sign that he's going to move immediately on tariffs. What are we likely to see when equity markets open tomorrow, Steve, in terms of reaction? What are they going to be looking for, the market participants?
Well, I think for starters, we're going to be looking for what he might be signing in the next hour or two, because that's really round one. I think that if there's not much consequential, the markets will sort of breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief now. I think this is something we're going to have to be used to. Basically the late night tweets and things of that nature. In this case, I think that we're still getting what the policy might be. We'll find out if a lot of the tariff talk is negotiating strategy or not. And I think ultimately the dollar and the bond market are going to play big parts in this, because he didn't really say anything about cutting corporate taxes today, which is one of the things that equities got very excited about. Bond markets far less so, because that's kind of a budget buster. That's partially why the bond market, bond futures recovered a bit, and the dollar sold off, because again, the relationship between rates and yields. I think also it's not lost on a lot of us that earnings season is really going to come into play over the coming week, and we have a Fed meeting next week. Let's see what they have to say on top of what the president may or may not do.
Well, that's a very good point. That relationship, I guess, between the executive branch there and the Fed. What are the members of the Fed going to be considering, do you think? Is it all going to be about what we hear from Trump between now and then?
I do think so. I think that the consensus for this meeting is nothing new. I mean, they did sort of acknowledge they front-ended a lot of the rate, some of the rate cuts, certainly by doing 2 to start, and then the December cut was probably not really necessary. We remember last Friday we saw the market sell off pretty hard because the labor market was actually quite strong, which reduces the need for the Fed to cut rates. But then we got good CPI report, which was positive, and the markets love that. So we are sort of back and forth. But I think that remember, the Fed is an independent institution, although they do certainly have their antenna open for what's going up, for what they might hear politically. And I think they are probably as confused as we are about what the effects of tariffs and immigration policy might be and how inflationary they might be, because depending on what comes down the pipe, that could really set the Fed's fight against inflation back, at least in the short term. And so I think that the Fed is really going to, I think barring any major commentary that we learned between now and January 29th, I think, the Fed Chairman Powell is going to be doing a little bit of dancing and at his press conference as he tries to avoid getting pinned down as reporters ask questions about how he might react to various policy initiatives.
Steve, you spoke about the DOGE committee, if you like, with Elon Musk at the helm there. Of course, you take a look at his inauguration, you had a lot of billionaires were on there with him. What influence are they likely to have on the presidency and vice versa, I guess? And you look at comments from the outgoing President Joe Biden talking about this oligarchy, if you like, America ruled by the ultra wealthy.
Yeah, I mean, someone made I heard a statistic today that they estimate that $1 trillion of wealth was in that room today with among the 250 people that were in there, because you had basically, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, I think Satya Nadella was in there. I definitely saw Tim Cook in there. And so, there's, at this point, I think, you certainly have, Mark Zuckerberg was there too. And I think he's very instructive in terms of how how the approach might be. I think Elon Musk was all in for Trump early. Zuckerberg and Bezos particularly, definitely pivoted once Trump won the election. Zuckerberg with ostentatiously getting rid of any fact checking on Facebook. And Bezos, I think there's some amount of self-preservation, because if your competitor in the space race is essentially taking up residency in a guest cottage at the future president's home, you probably have to do a little dancing to make sure you're not left out. So I think that it's clear that the leaders of these big tech companies have the president's ear. But one thing that's very certain with Donald Trump is he pretty much does what he wants to do. And so to the extent that they can, I think they're certainly making an effort, if not to ingratiate themselves, but certainly to be on his good side. I think that's a little bit of self-preservation to some extent, because, there have been sort of, he's made comments about big tech too in the past. And so let's see, this is the difficulty in trying to read what's coming down, because, he's not an easy person to read.
Yeah, and just very quickly on that point, of course, his opponents say, look, his presidency will all be about enriching himself and his circle. You take a look at crypto, and maybe they have a point, Steve, with the release of those meme coins, Trump and Melania. There are some serious questions to ask there, aren't there? How do you view it?
Well, I mean, he's very skilled at knowing how to utilize his name to profit. A cynical view would be his embrace of crypto was that, somebody told him that this was, you could basically just create money out of nothing. And to a certain extent, he pretty much has, for himself and his wife, and to some extent his family, because I believe they own big amounts of these cryptos. I think it's not a coincidence that he did it, the weekend before he became president, because, you can argue that he's not doing it while he's president. It definitely has a bit of an odor to it, but, I'm not going to wade in too deeply. I think, to some extent, people who trade in secondary coins, it's really not that different than the meme stock phenomenon. You're doing it because of either affinity or to try to be one step ahead of the crowd. And so I think you're right. It certainly doesn't seem to pass the smell test. It probably, by doing it before he was president, gets around it.
Well, Steve, one thing is guaranteed. We're going to have a lot to talk about this time next week, given how fast he's likely to move. Thanks so much for joining us from Interactive Brokers.
Indeed. My pleasure, Andrew. Take care.
Quick check at the local market where we're likely to open. Looking for a positive start today. SPI futures there up around 0.25%. Stay with us because the open is just a minute or so away.